He invited his ex-wife to the wedding just to humiliate her in front of the whole family. But when that white limousine stopped and she stepped out with 2 twins and a millionaire, he saw that he had dug his own grave. Marcelo held the wedding invitation in his hands and smiled in a way that gave chills. It was the smile of someone who was planning something cruel, the kind that makes the stomach churn just by looking. He was typing a message on his cell phone, pausing, deleting, typing again. He wanted each word to hurt like a well-placed stab. "Isabella, you need to come to Leticia's wedding. I want you to see how well I am doing without you." He sent it and laughed to himself. The revenge was only beginning. On the other side of town, Isabella looked at her phone with her hands trembling. It wasn't just the invitation. It was the way he wrote it, as if he were a king summoning a beggar woman for amusement. She knew exactly what Marcelo was doing. He wanted her to show up destroyed, without money, so he could show the whole family how right he was to have abandoned her. That was what he had wanted since the divorce, to prove that she really was worthless. Miguel and Mateus were playing on the floor of the small living room when they saw their mother collapse onto the sofa. The twins were 4 years old, but they already knew when something was wrong. Miguel, always the more talkative one, dropped his toy car and ran to her. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Mateus came right behind, with that shyer way, but equally worried. Isabella tried to dry her tears too quickly, but she couldn't hide that she was shattered inside. "It's nothing, my loves," she lied, pulling both into a tight hug. But Miguel was no fool. He had seen his mother cry many times since his father left. "It's because of Daddy again, isn't it?" The innocent question was like a punch to Isabella's chest. How to explain to 2 children that their own father hated them so much that he wanted to humiliate their mother in front of everyone? Mateus, who almost never spoke about his father, whispered softly, "Mommy, does Daddy really not like us?" His voice came out so small, so broken, that Isabella felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She looked at those 2 boys, too beautiful for the cruel world, and something inside her broke completely. The tears began to flow uncontrollably. Isabella remembered the day she told Marcelo she was pregnant with twins. He stayed in silence for long minutes, looking at her as if it were her fault. 2 children, Isabella. 2. As if it were a tragedy. As if she had ruined his life on purpose. She should have realized at that moment that he was never going to love those children. But she believed that when they were born, everything would change. What nonsense. Marcelo only got worse. "My princes," she said, holding the boys' faces between her hands. "You are the most precious things that exist in this world. If someone can't see that, the problem is with that person, never with you." Miguel nodded seriously, as if he were recording every word. Mateus just snuggled closer in his mother's lap. They didn't fully understand, but they felt she was trying to protect them from something very bad. The phone rang suddenly, an unknown number. Isabella hesitated before answering. "Hello?" The voice on the other side was masculine, calm, but there was something in it that caught the attention. "Isabella, my name is Eduardo. I overheard a conversation I shouldn't have heard." She furrowed her brow in confusion. "What do you mean?" Eduardo sighed on the other side of the line. "Your ex-husband was in the restaurant here below the building, speaking too loudly about his plan to humiliate you at the wedding." Isabella's blood ran cold. "What plan?" Eduardo paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "He said he invited you knowing you don't have money for nice clothes, that he wants the whole family to see you in the mud. Those were his words." Isabella closed her eyes, feeling anger rise in her throat. Of course that was it. Marcelo was always too cowardly to face her alone. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked suspiciously. Eduardo breathed deeply. "Because I've been through something similar. I know how it hurts to be humiliated by the person who should protect you." There was real pain in his voice, something Isabella recognized immediately. It was the voice of someone who had been destroyed and managed to rebuild himself. "And why?" he continued. "I saw your children playing in the building's common area yesterday. 2 children too beautiful to have a father who doesn't value them." Miguel pulled his mother's blouse. "Who is it, Mommy?" Isabella covered the phone and whispered, "A man who wants to help us." Miguel's little eyes shined with curiosity. Mateus just observed, as he always did when something new happened. "Help how?" Miguel insisted. "Because a 4-year-old child wants to know everything." "I don't know yet, love. Let Mommy talk." "Isabella," Eduardo spoke again, "can I make a proposal? I know it might seem crazy, but listen to me until the end." She looked at her children, at the cursed invitation on top of the table, at the small apartment she could barely afford to pay for. "I'm listening." Eduardo took another pause. "I have the means to, let's say, Level the playing field. Make your ex-husband swallow his own words. How? Curiosity was killing Isabella. Eduardo laughed softly, but it wasn't a mean laugh. It was the laugh of someone who was about to do justice. Trust me just for today? Isabella looked at Miguel and Mateus, who were watching her with those huge eyes full of hope. They deserved to see their mother happy at least once. They deserved to feel special, as every child should feel. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. Eduardo went quiet for so long that Isabella thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was choked up. Because when I was the age of your children, my father humiliated me in front of everyone and no one defended me. I never forgot how small I felt that day. Tears returned to Isabella's eyes, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of pain. They were tears of someone who had just found an angel when she needed it most. I accept, she whispered, but with one condition. My children cannot get hurt in this. If it is dangerous for them in any way... Isabella, Eduardo interrupted her gently. Your children are going to feel like princes today. I promise, on my honor. There was so much sincerity in his voice that she believed immediately. What do I need to do? Eduardo laughed, and this time, the laugh was full of mischief. Just trust, and get ready, because you three are going to put on the biggest show that family has ever seen. When Isabella hung up the phone, Miguel was already by her side, curious. Mommy, is the man going to help us? She smiled, and it was the first real smile in weeks. He is, my love. Today we are going to the wedding like royalty. Mateus got excited for the first time. Are we going to be real princes? Isabella hugged her two children, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. On the other side of town, Marcelo was finishing telling his mother how Isabella was going to show up at the wedding. Mother, you'll see. She's going to arrive all disheveled, in old clothes, dragging those children. Everyone will realize I was right to leave her. Mrs. Miriam shook her head with disgust. Served her right, son. Who told her to destroy a family? But Marcelo had no idea that he had just signed his own sentence, because Eduardo Mendez wasn't just a charitable neighbor. He was the man who was going to transform the worst day of Isabella's life into the best. And Marcelo? Well, Marcelo was about to discover that some revenges have the power to turn against the one who planned them. The game was set, and, for the first time in years, Isabella had all the cards in hand. Eduardo Mendez was standing in front of the mirror in his penthouse apartment when he decided that this would be the most important day of his business life. Not because of the millions he moved daily, but because he was finally going to use his power for something that really mattered. He had heard every poisonous word Marcelo spoke in the restaurant, every cruel detail of the plan to destroy Isabella, and it touched something very deep inside him. 20 minutes later, Eduardo was knocking on the door of Isabella's apartment. When she opened it, he almost couldn't hide the surprise. Even with red eyes from crying, even with simple clothes and messy hair, she had something special, a dignity that all the humiliations in the world couldn't take away. Eduardo? She asked insecurely. He smiled in the gentlest way he could. Hi, Isabella. I came to meet the princes who live here. Miguel appeared, running, before his mother, even finished inviting him in. You're the man from the phone, he shouted excitedly, stopping right in front of Eduardo and looking him up and down with that filterless curiosity of children. Mateus came behind more slowly, hiding halfway behind his mother, but watching everything with attention. Eduardo knelt to get on the boy's level, and Isabella noticed that he did this naturally, without rush. Miguel and Mateus, right? Eduardo extended his hand to greet each one, as if they were important adults. The twins were radiant with the attention. Mommy said you are going to help us be princes, Miguel spoke excitedly. Eduardo laughed, but it was a caring laugh. You already are princes. We are just going to make everyone realize that. Mateus finally approached. For real? His little voice came out shy but full of hope. For real, Eduardo confirmed. And Isabella saw something in his eyes that made her trust completely. It wasn't pity or charity, it was genuine respect for her and for the boys. But before anything, I need to tell you who I really am. Isabella furrowed her brow. What do you mean? Eduardo stood up and went to the window, looking at the city below. I'm not just a neighbor who heard a conversation by chance. Eduardo turned to her, and there was something different in his posture now. More serious, more imposing. My name is Eduardo Mendez. I am the owner of the Mendez Group, one of the largest logistics companies in the state. Isabella felt her legs wobble. She knew that name. Everyone knew. Are you joking? She whispered. Eduardo took a wallet from his pocket and showed some cards. CEO, president, founder, all true. Why didn't you say that on the phone? Isabella was trying to process the information. Eduardo sighed, sitting on the sofa next to the boys, who continued playing as if nothing had changed. Because I wanted you to trust me as a person, not as a rich businessman. He looked at Miguel and Mateus. And because I know you wouldn't accept help if you thought it was charity. Miguel dropped his toy car and climbed into Eduardo's lap without ceremony. Uncle Eduardo, are you really rich? Eduardo laughed at the direct question. I am. Mateus approached too, curious. Richer than Daddy? The innocent question caused a heavy silence to fall in the room. Eduardo looked at Isabella, who was clearly uncomfortable. Much richer than your father, Mateus. But do you know what makes me richer than him? What? Both asked at the same time. Eduardo hugged the boys. It's having you two here with me now. Your father lost the greatest treasures of his life when he abandoned you. The words came out so sincere that Isabella felt her eyes fill with tears again, but this time they were good tears. Someone finally saw her children as she saw them, as the special children they were. Eduardo, Isabella said softly, why do you want to do this? For real? He stayed quiet for a moment, playing with Miguel's hair, who had snuggled into his lap. Because when I was 7 years old, my father took me to a party at his company. I was all dressed up, excited to meet his colleagues. Eduardo's voice became lower, sadder. But when we got there, he told everyone I was the maid's son, that my mother had tricked him, saying he was my father. Eduardo stopped, took a deep breath. Everyone laughed. I stood there 7 years old, being humiliated by my own father in front of strangers. Isabella put her hand on his shoulder. Eduardo! He shook his head. I never forgot how small I felt that day. Invisible. As if I were worth nothing. Mateus, who was listening to everything even being small, approached Eduardo. Uncle, were you sad? Eduardo smiled even with teary eyes. I was very sad, Mateus. But do you know what happened after? The boys shook their heads. I decided that when I grew up, I would never let anyone feel the way I felt that day. Miguel clapped. Like a superhero, Eduardo laughed. Like a superhero, Miguel. And your father? Isabella asked softly. Eduardo became serious again. He died a few years ago, poor, alone, after losing everything gambling. He looked at the boys. Do you know what was the last thing he said to me? Isabella shook her head. That he regretted rejecting me, that I was the only good thing he had done in his life, and he was too stupid to realize it. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who understood each other without needing to speak much. That's why, Eduardo continued, when I heard your ex-husband planning to humiliate you, and by extension these boys, I knew I couldn't stand by. He looked directly into Isabella's eyes. Because you three deserve to be treated like royalty, and today, that is exactly what is going to happen. Miguel jumped from Eduardo's lap excited. Are we going to be real kings? Eduardo stood up too. You are going to be the kings of the party, Miguel. Everyone is going to stop to look when you arrive. Mateus joined his little hands excitedly. And is Mommy going to be queen? Eduardo looked at Isabella, and there was something different in his look now, something that made her heart race. Your mother was always a queen, Mateus. It's just that today, everyone is going to realize it. What exactly are you planning? Isabella asked, half nervous. Eduardo smiled, and this time the smile had a hint of mischief. First, we're going to make you shine as you deserve. Clothes worthy of royalty, a car to match, the whole production. He made a dramatic pause. And then we're going to that wedding to show your ex-husband that he made the biggest mistake of his life. But what if he finds out who you are? Isabella was worried. Eduardo laughed softly. Ah, Isabella, that's the best part. He approached her, speaking low so the boys wouldn't hear everything. Marcelo has worked for me for 3 years at the West Zone branch. He's never seen me in person. He only knows my signature on documents. Isabella's jaw dropped. Are you serious? Completely serious. He always says he has important contacts in the company, that he knows influential people. The truth is that he is just an ordinary salesman who keeps boasting about things he doesn't have. Eduardo laughed. Today he's going to discover that the big boss he talks so much trash about behind his back is dating the woman he abandoned. Miguel pulled Eduardo's pants. Uncle, does Daddy work for you? Eduardo knelt again. He does, but don't you worry about that now, okay? Mateus approached too. He's going to be mad. Eduardo looked at Isabella, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Maybe he will be, Mateus, but sometimes people need to be mad to learn to be better. Eduardo, Isabella said, her voice trembling. Are you sure about this? I don't want my children to see a fight. Eduardo stood up and put his hands on her shoulders. Isabella, trust me. There won't be a fight. There will be justice. An educated, elegant, but definitive justice. He looked at the boys who were watching everything with attention. And these princes here are going to see that there are people in the world who truly value them. Isabella took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt she wasn't alone, that someone was truly on her side. Okay, she said finally, but promise you'll protect them? Eduardo smiled, and it was the most sincere smile she had ever seen in her life. Isabella, starting today, I am going to protect the three of you as if you were my own family. Miguel and Mateus ran to hug Eduardo, who received them with genuine affection. Uncle Eduardo, are you going to be our new daddy? Miguel asked innocently. Eduardo looked at Isabella over the boys' heads, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. Who knows, Miguel? Who knows? And at that moment, Isabella knew her life was about to change forever. For the better. Isabella spent the whole night awake, looking at the ceiling and wondering if she was doing the right thing. Eduardo seemed sincere, but something in the back of her mind said that stories too beautiful to be true were usually exactly that. Well-told lies. She looked at Miguel and Mateus sleeping in the bed next to her, breathing peacefully, and felt her chest tighten. What if it was all a cruel prank? What if Eduardo was a friend of Marcelo plotting something even worse? When the phone rang at 7 in the morning, she had already been awake for hours. Good morning, Isabella. Ready for the big day? Eduardo's voice sounded excited, full of energy. Isabella took a deep breath before responding. Eduardo, I need to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest with me. On the other side, he became serious. Of course, you can ask anything. Isabella closed her eyes. Why do you really want to do this? And don't come at me with that story of kindness. No one spends that much money on a stranger without a reason. The silence on the other side was too long. When Eduardo spoke again, his voice was different, heavier, more real. You're right. I didn't tell everything. Isabella felt her stomach churn. What? What else is there? Eduardo sighed deeply. Isabella, I don't live in this building by chance. I bought the apartment here because I wanted to be close to you. Her blood ran cold. What do you mean close to us? Are you stalking me? It's not that, Eduardo said quickly. Let me explain everything, please. Isabella was ready to hang up, but something in his voice made her hesitate. Speak up, Eduardo. He took a deep breath again. 6 months ago, Marcelo tried to pull a scam on me, $1 million scam that almost destroyed my company. The words came out like punches to Isabella's stomach. What scam? Eduardo stayed quiet for a few seconds. He forged my signature on contracts, diverted 2 million reais from the company. Isabella felt her legs wobble. Are you joking? Eduardo continued, his voice increasingly tense. I had 2 options, have him arrested or investigate why an ordinary employee would do such a thing. I chose to investigate. Isabella sat on the bed trying to process the information. And what did you find? Eduardo made a dramatic pause. I found out he had an ex-wife and 2 children he abandoned. I found out he was desperate for money to impress his new girlfriend. That's why you came after me. Isabella was beginning to understand. Eduardo sighed. In the beginning, yes. I wanted to understand what kind of woman married a man capable of stealing millions. His voice became softer. But when I saw you working at the supermarket, taking care of the boys alone, paying all the bills honestly, I realized you were the victim, not the accomplice. Miguel appeared at the bedroom door, rubbing his little eyes. Mommy, who are you talking to? Isabella covered the phone. With Uncle Eduardo, love. Go back to bed. But Miguel approached, curious as always. Uncle Eduardo, today is the day to be a prince. Isabella returned to the phone, and Eduardo had heard everything. Isabella, he said gently, I know that lying wasn't right, but everything I said about wanting to protect you is true. Eduardo, Isabella said, her voice trembling. Did you recover your money? He stayed quiet. I recovered it. Marcelo returned everything when he found out I knew. But do you know what part revolted me the most? Isabella waited. When I confronted him, do you know what he said? Eduardo paused, and there was real anger in his voice. He said it was your fault, that you were the one who forced him to steal because you demanded too much from him. The rage that rose in Isabella's throat was so intense she had to hold herself back from screaming. He said that? He said it, Eduardo confirmed. He did. And it was at that moment I decided he was going to pay for everything, not just for the theft, but for having destroyed a family and still having the nerve to blame the victim. Isabella wiped a tear that escaped. That's why you want to help me. It's not kindness, it's revenge. It started as revenge, Eduardo admitted. But yesterday when I met you and the boys, he stopped as if choosing words. Yesterday it turned into protection, it turned into justice, and it turned into something I didn't expect to feel. Isabella closed her eyes. What? Eduardo took a deep breath. It turned into love, Isabella. For you and for the boys. Mateus appeared at the door too, still sleepy. Mommy, where's the breakfast? Isabella looked at her two children, with messy hair and faces of those who just woke up, and made the decision. Eduardo, do you promise my children won't get hurt in this? He didn't hesitate. I promise, on my life. Isabella sighed. Then let's do this, but your way, completely. 2 hours later, Eduardo knocked on the door, carrying 3 huge boxes. Miguel and Mateus ran to open it before their mother even got close. Uncle Eduardo, what's in the box? Miguel shouted excitedly. Eduardo smiled, but Isabella noticed there was nervousness in his smile. Prince clothes, he answered. But before opening, I need to say something serious to you. Eduardo knelt in front of the twins, getting at their level. Miguel, Mateus, you know we are going to the wedding today and you're going to see your daddy, right? The boys nodded. Mateus, who always stayed quieter when they talked about his father, hid behind his brother. Are you afraid of him? Eduardo asked gently. Miguel shook his head, trying to be brave, but Mateus whispered softly, He yells a lot. The confession came out so small, so scared, that Eduardo felt his chest tighten. Isabella approached, putting her hand on Mateus's shoulder. He won't yell today, my love. Uncle Eduardo will be with us. Eduardo looked at her, then at the boys. Mateus, can I tell you a secret? The boy pulled his face out from behind his brother, curious. What secret? Eduardo smiled. I was also afraid of my father when I was little. He also yelled a lot. Mateus approached a little closer. And then, what did you do? Eduardo took his little hand. I grew up and learned that fathers who yell do that because they are the ones who are afraid of not being important. Miguel, who was listening to everything, asked, Does our daddy have fear? Eduardo nodded. A lot of fear, Miguel. Fear that you will grow up and realize he is not a good father. Mateus furrowed his little brow thoughtfully. But we already know that. The innocent and devastating answer made Eduardo laugh, but it was a sad laugh. Exactly, Mateus. That's why he is trying to make your mommy look bad, so you don't realize that the one who is bad is him. Isabella sat on the floor next to them. Boys, today you are going to see a lot of people. Some people might say bad things about mommy. Miguel became serious. What kind of thing? Isabella took a deep breath. They might say that mommy doesn't take good care of you, that you are poorly dressed, poorly behaved. Mateus became indignant. But that's a lie. Mommy takes super good care of us. Eduardo smiled, this time a true smile. It is a lie indeed, Mateus, and today everyone is going to see the truth. He pointed to the boxes. How about we see these clothes? Miguel and Mateus ran to the boxes as if it were Christmas. When they opened them, their little eyes shined with admiration. They were perfect children's tuxedos in their size, with patent leather shoes and even bow ties. Wow, Miguel shouted. Like a Prince movie? Mateus picked up the bow tie, enchanted. Uncle Eduardo, is this really ours? Eduardo nodded. Only yours. And there's more. He opened the third box, revealing a royal blue dress that made Isabella lose her breath. It was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen in her life. Eduardo, she whispered, you didn't need to. I did indeed, he responded, looking into her eyes. You deserve to feel like the queen you always were. Miguel and Mateus ran to change, too excited to stay still. While they were getting ready in the room, Eduardo approached Isabella. There's one more thing I didn't tell. She looked at him worried. What now? Eduardo took a key from his pocket. The limousine I rented isn't rented. Isabella furrowed her brow. What do you mean? He smiled, but there was nervousness in the smile. It's mine. I bought it yesterday for you. Isabella felt her legs wobble again. Eduardo, are you crazy? Why would you do that? He approached her, holding her hands between his. Because for the first time in my life, I found something worth more than all my millions. He looked into her eyes, and there was absolute truth there. I found a family I want to protect forever. At that moment, Miguel and Mateus came out of the room, impeccable in their tuxedos, and even Isabella got emotional seeing how beautiful they were. "Mommy!" Miguel shouted, spinning to show the outfit. "I'm like a real prince." Mateus, shyer, only smiled, but it was a smile Isabella hadn't seen in months. Eduardo knelt and adjusted the bow ties of both. Now indeed, the true princes are ready. He looked at Isabella. And the queen. When Isabella came out of the room with the blue dress, Eduardo felt his heart stop. She was absolutely stunning. Miguel and Mateus clapped, excited. "Mommy turned into a princess," Mateus shouted, forgetting the shyness. Eduardo approached her, offering his arm. "Ready to give the life lesson your ex-husband deserves?" Isabella looked at her children, beautiful and happy for the first time in a long time, then at Eduardo, who had returned dignity to her family. "More than ready," she answered, and for the first time in years she felt truly invincible. The white limousine shone under the afternoon sun like a spaceship that had descended from the sky. Eduardo drove personally with Isabella beside him in the front seat, radiant in the royal blue dress that seemed to have been made especially for her. In the back seat, Miguel and Mateus were glued to the window, waving to all the cars that passed. "Uncle Eduardo, everyone is looking at us," Miguel shouted excitedly. Mateus, who was normally shy, was equally thrilled. "Mommy, we are famous!" When the church began to appear on the horizon, Eduardo felt his heart race. It wasn't nervousness for the confrontation that was coming. It was anxiety to see Marcelo's face when he realized he had completely underestimated the woman he abandoned. "Isabella," he said gently, "how are you feeling?" She looked at him, and there was a confidence in her eyes that didn't exist in the morning. "I'm feeling like I've never felt in my life. Powerful." The church was packed, cars parked everywhere, well-dressed guests walking toward the main entrance. Marcelo was at the door greeting people as if he were the groom, all puffed up in the dark suit he probably bought in installments. Beside him, Mrs. Miriam received greetings with that fake smile of someone who thinks they are better than everyone. "Look there," Eduardo pointed discreetly at the reception committee. Miguel stretched to see through the window. "Is that Daddy?" His voice came out curious, without hurt, as if he were seeing any stranger. Mateus also looked, but stayed quiet. Eduardo noticed the different reaction of the two. "Miguel, Mateus, remember what we talked about. You are real princes. No matter what anyone says, you are special." The boys nodded, serious like little soldiers preparing for battle. Eduardo stopped the limousine right in front of the main entrance, in the spot where normally only the couple's cars stop. Immediately, dozens of heads turned. Guests stopped talking, took out cell phones to photograph, began to whisper among themselves. Who could have arrived? It must be someone famous. What a beautiful limousine. Marcelo also looked, but from afar, still not recognizing who was inside the car. Eduardo got out first, impeccable, in the black tuxedo that cost more than Marcelo's annual salary. He had that natural presence of someone who commands, that posture of a man accustomed to being respected. He walked around the limousine slowly, creating suspense, savoring the moment. All eyes were glued to him. Who is this man? He looks like a businessman. What elegance. Even Mrs. Miriam stopped greeting guests to observe. When Eduardo opened the door for Isabella, it was as if time had frozen. She stepped out of the limousine with the elegance of a real princess, the blue dress fluttering slightly in the afternoon breeze, her hair tied in a sophisticated bun that she had learned to do watching tutorials on her phone. The soft makeup highlighted the natural beauty that worries and sadness had hidden for so long. She was absolutely stunning. "My goodness," a lady whispered too loudly. "Who is this woman? She looks like a soap opera actress. What a marvelous dress." Isabella smiled, extending her hand to Eduardo with a naturalness that surprised herself. She felt as if she had been born for that moment, as if all the pain of the last years had been only preparation for this transformation. But the real show began when Miguel and Mateus stepped out of the limousine. The two boys were impeccable in the child-sized tuxedos, with the bow ties perfectly adjusted and hair combed to the side. Miguel came out first, waving to everyone as if he were a little prince visiting his subjects. "Hi, everyone," he shouted, drawing emotional giggles from the ladies present. Mateus came out right behind, more contained, but equally elegant. He held Eduardo's hand naturally as if he were his real father. "Uncle Eduardo, is everyone looking?" he whispered, but he didn't seem scared. He seemed proud. Eduardo knelt and adjusted his bow tie. "It's because you two are the most handsome boys at this party." Mateus smiled, and it was a smile that melted the hearts of all the women present. It was at this moment that Marcelo finally recognized who had arrived. The fake smile disappeared from his face as if he had taken a punch to the stomach. His mouth opened, his eyes widened, his face turned white as paper. "It can't be," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Mrs. Miriam followed her son's gaze and also froze. Marcelo, is that Isabella? Her voice came out strange, incredulous. It is, Marcelo answered, still in shock, but how? Where did she get money for that? Mrs. Miriam watched the scene open-mouthed. The daughter-in-law she always criticized, whom she always called a gold digger and opportunist, was there looking like a queen. And not only that, she was accompanied by a man who exuded power and money from every pore. Eduardo approached the church entrance with Isabella on one arm and the two boys walking beside him. Each step was calculated. Each movement had the weight of someone who knows exactly what they are doing. When they got close to Marcelo, Eduardo stopped and smiled. It wasn't a smirk. It was the polite smile of someone who is about to give a lesson in etiquette. Good afternoon, Eduardo said, extending his hand to Marcelo. You must be Miguel and Mateus's father. I'm Ed,